Hi, everybody. This is Mrs. Lark, and my book this week is called Jump at the Sun, and it's based on the true life tale of unstoppable story catcher Zora Neale Hurston. So it's written with a little bit of an accent uh, based on the part of the country she's from, because many times I'm sure people say to you that New Yorkers have a New York accent, or people from the South have a Southern accent, or people up north have a Northern accent. So, and even out west in California, you'll hear an accent. So this book is written trying to capture the accent of where Zora is from. All right, and the author who wrote this book about her, is Alicia D. Williams, and it's illustrated by Jacqueline Alcantara. So let's find out about Zora. In a town called Eatonville, a place where magnolias smelled even prettier than they looked, oranges were as sweet as they were plump, and the people just plain old got along, lived a girl who was attracted to tails like mosquitoes to skin. Zora was her name. Zora got to lovin' tales from hearing the townsfolk swap stories at Joe Clark's general store. Oftentimes, Mama sent her over to fetch a little sugar or salt, and Zora would stall, make a 10-minute errand last an hour, just to overhear tales like how that trickster Brer Rabbit always got the best of Brer Fox. Only thing pulled her away was Mama calling, "Zora, if you don't come here, you better." And then on this side, they've listed some of the stories that she was listening to. When there were no errands to run and Zora couldn't get an earful of tales, she'd make up her own. She'd fashion dolls from scraps she found. A loose doorknob became Reverend Doorknob. The Do Not Touch Pears scented soap was carved into Mr. Sweet Smell. Ears of corn were hewed into Miss Corn Shuck and Miss Corn Cob. Zora had stories to tell, and stories needed characters. And when Mama sent Zora and her stories out of the house, Zora'd perch herself atop their gatepost, calling out to travelers, "Don't you want me to go a piece of the way with you?" If a car stopped, Zora climbed right in. She'd have those people laughing like she was storytelling on Joe Clark's porch herself. Then half a mile or so later, she'd hop out and stroll on home. Now, back then, some folks called storytelling telling lies, and if Zora's preaching papa got home from church and caught her spouting them, he'd give chase lightning quick. Even Zora's grandma aimed to sting her backside, but never could, not with Mama's arms stretched wide as tree limbs. Truth was, Mama approved of Zora's storytelling. She didn't fancy the idea of her children tilling land, so she encouraged Zora to jump at the sun. You might not land on the sun, but at least you'll get off the ground. Well, in fact, Zora clung to those words tighter than Brer Fox would have clung to Brer Rabbit if he'd have been able to catch him. Zora needed him too, 'cause one day Mama got herself a chest cold that wouldn't get better. Then one September evening, Mama closed her eyes for the last time. Zora and her sister and her brothers were so sobbing-hearted that even the house seemed to mourn. 2 days later, Zora's only sister and an older brother headed back to school. Papa was already on the road preaching. His boys seemed capable, but his tale-telling girl was too much for him to worry about. So 2 weeks after the funeral, he shipped Zora off to Florida Baptist Academy boarding school. Zora dug her nose into books, intent on reaching the sun, It was what Mama had always taught her to do, after all. Then her papa got a new wife who was stingier than a peacock. Zora's stepmother tight-fisted their money. School fees were unpaid, and back to Eatonville Zora went. To hear Zora tell it back home, the walls were gummy with gloom, with her little brother's ragged, dirty clothes. This was wrong, and Zora made it known. Fussing and fighting commenced from the kitchen to the gatepost. Finally, her stepmother pointed to the door, and out stomped 14-year-old Zora down the dusty road. Though friends spared a pallet for sleeping, there wasn't time for Zora to be pondering the capers of Brer Rabbit. She had to earn her keep, but she was better at storytelling than holding a job. She was fired from maid's jobs for reading the employer's books instead of cleaning. She'd up and quit babysitting her oldest brother's children when he quit on his promise to let her go back to school. For 12 long years, she traveled from job to job, from Florida to Baltimore, in and out of schools. Zora was miserable, except for when she spooned out Eatonville trickster tales to who'd ever sop 'em up, and sakes alive, folks were hungry. The sun, however, was getting antsy, waiting on Zora, so she called down, saying, "Ain't you supposed to be meeting me up here?" Reckon Zora was getting antsy, too. How was Zora to jump all the way to Old Big Yellow? By doing what made her happiest. And Zora was happiest at school and hearing those stories. In Baltimore, 26-year-olds couldn't go to public school for free, so Zora told a tale of her own. She chopped her age to 16, then plunked herself down in a high school classroom. Even though she had a lot less money than the other students, Zora walked through the halls like her shoes were lined with gold. That girl was back in school. Woohoo! The sun waited patiently for 2 more years until she graduated, then called out, "Jump, Zora!" So she did, to Howard University. The best part? All those years of tarrying around Joe Clark's and making up tales out of corn husks paid off. She shared her tales with the director of the Stylus, the college's literary club, and was offered membership. Zora not only wrote for their magazine, but the door opened to other events where she met successful writers like W.E. Du Bois, who wrote a book she loved, The Souls of Black Folk. Soon she got to thinking, I want to be a famous author too. So Zora jumped again. She got herself a typewriter, and her fingers got tap-tapping, and all her Eatonville memories poured onto those pages. One of her stories was even about a little girl sitting atop a gatepost. Though Zora loved her schooling, she found she loved writing more. And at that time, new writers who wanted to get published went to one place. So in January 1925, Zora made her way to New York City. As in Eatonville, folks welcomed her. During the day, she listened to book discussions at the library or lectures at the YMCA. Come nighttime, Zora be'd swinging in Harlem, where Count Basie or Fats Waller pounded on the piano and folks danced the Charleston. Once her feet were too sore for one more kick, Zora would hold court, surrounded by writers like Arna Botemps, Fannie Hurst, and her best pal Langston Hughes. Langston's poems jumped at the sun for sure. If Zora's stories held the ears of these great writers, surely her mama was right that Zora could really reach the sun too. And these were stories that she told them. That spring, Zora jumped again. She mailed a handful of stories to a magazine's literary contest. Her words were so alive that the judges saw the moss on the trees, smelled the sawgrass in the Everglades, and heard the men chanting on the railroad. Then those judges began chanting Zora's name. She won numerous awards. All of these are awards that she won. A fancy college heard about Zora's storytelling and offered her admission, but if there was one thing Zora had learned, it was that school was expensive and she didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. Zora was doubtful. "Jump, Zora," Mama's words sang. And wouldn't you know it, her jumping paid off. Bernard College offered her a scholarship. It wasn't much, but her friends helped her out. And Zora put together a collection of tales from home, called it the Eatonville Anthology, and earned a bit for that. For the first time in all her schooling, Zora was able to stay in school. For her very last semester, Zora had one big project left to do, fieldwork for her anthology class. Anthropology is the study of humans and their behavior. Her professor, Dr. Boas, suggested that Zora collect folklore. Now, folklore includes stories and beliefs passed down from generation to generation, exactly like the ones told at Joe Clark's. Shucks, Dr. Boas might as well have asked Zora to go down to Joe Clark's for some sugar. She had heard Brer Rabbit's adventures and why the squinch owl screeched since she was a baby. How many lumps of sugar had she fetched to hear about High John the Conqueror? Or how many times had her mama called Zora, 'cause she'd be collecting more stories. Zora looked up at the sky. "I'm coming for you, son," and the sun smiled down. "I know." Zora drove into Eatonville, and even after she'd been gone for 22 years, the town folks still recognized her. "Well, if it ain't Zora Hurston." They rattled off questions before she could even answer them. You're going to stay a while, several months. You're going to stay a while, I reckon. What are you up to?" Come to, Zora at last sat on Joe Clark's store porch. The townsfolk ate gingerbread, drank buttermilk, and commenced to woofing about John and the Frog. The man went to heaven, and Jack and the devil, and the menfolk plucked their guitar strings. It's said that even the moon dipped lower to get an earful of tales. But outside Eatonville, folks zipped their lips to the meddling stranger with her notebook and northern accent. To ease their minds, Zora spun a believable tale about her own self. "I'm a bootlegger running from the law." The folks then trusted her. She wasn't just snooping, and they offered a treasure of folklore. Zora's college project was one of her biggest jumps. She trekked all the way from Alabama to New Orleans to Haiti and the Bahamas, gathering as much folklore as the leopard has spots. And then she stopped jumping long enough to take her notebooks and tapes and find herself a home in Eagle, Florida. There on her porch, with papers spread out, Zora took her biggest jump ever. She set up her typewriter and her fingers got tap-tapping all those tales into books. Then she tapped up her very own stories and made her own books too. Zora, like her mama always dreamed, reached the sun. And now when you open those books, it's all as if you were visiting on Zora's porch, just like the porch visiting all those years ago. She had offered you a chair and filled you full of High John the Conqueror tales, or told you the talking mule lies she got from the Florida railroad workers. Of course, she'd woof about that old Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox too. And that sun would have beamed down mightily, pleased, just a-listening. All right, boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed the story, Jump at the Sun. And one word I can think of for Zora is perseverance. She did not give up, and she reached her goal. All right, I'd love to know what you think about the story. And if you've written any of your stories, I'd love to hear them. Have a great week, everyone.